In the previous episode, we have seen Killian who humiliates the protagonist because she is a part of Rigelhof. And we also learn about the first major conflict between Edith and Rice on the day the jewelers arrive at Rudwick Manor, resulting in chaos. Scene comes to the present moment. We see our protagonist left alone on the table when everyone is focused on Rice, helping Rice to choose the perfect jewelry for herself.
I came because the Duchess invited me. Usually I would try to join in on their conversation, but in truth, the biggest reason I didn't want to come today was because of this guy. After tomorrow's incident, I didn't know how to face Killian again. I can understand now how Edith would have felt isolated.
Suddenly Rice speaks up, so the protagonist doesn't feel alone and isolated, and suggests a necklace to her.
Look, Edith, I think this necklace would look great on you.
The protagonist feels amazed by the beauty of the necklace and compliments the ruby, which is the main part of the attraction of the necklace. And everyone insists to the protagonist to try the necklace on her. As she is about to reach for the necklace, Killian stops her and insists on helping the protagonist to wear the necklace. The protagonist is surprised by the sudden change in the air.
Why is he doing this? So he is doing this for Mrs. Duchess. So he can't stand to worry his mother, is that it? That is why he is behaving in this manner.
Our protagonist doesn't waste this opportunity and tease Killian.
What do you think? How do I look, husband?
You look beautiful.
Really?
Killian also took care of the payment for the necklace, and everyone praised Killian's action and his first gift to his wife. The protagonist feels a bit regretful because she could not have her hand on bigger gems. It would have greatly helped her emergency fund for escaping the Rudwick Manor in the future. And even if she falls into poverty, she doesn't think she could ever sell this necklace. In the evening we see the protagonist burning the letters she received as Edith's avatar.
They are still sending invitations even after I ignored every single one. How many parties did Edith attend before I came along? She probably went just to spread bad rumors about Rice.
While going through all the letters, she found a letter with the Rigelhof family seal on it. She opens the letter to read it.
I have waited long enough for you to get used to your life there. It's about time you do your part of the job now. I heard you have gained access to their confidential documents by helping Mrs. Duchess with her work.
If he knows I'm helping with administration, that means he has planted someone in the manor.
The protagonist doesn't care much about it, and the next day we see the consequences. Somebody has already leaked the information that the protagonist was handling. The next morning Duke Rudwick interrogates her on suspicion of leaking confidential information from the house. The protagonist swears on the honor of her and her father. But no one believes her. And Duke Rudwick shows her the documents organized by her. These were specifically prepared for you by Rhinon with entirely false information. The protagonist's father bought up every item on the list that is proof that her was fooled by false information, and she is responsible for this.
I'm sorry to say, you must have your reasons for giving me false documents, but whether the information is true or false, I only did what was assigned to me. I did not share this information with anyone else.
No one believes the protagonist's words and keeps accusing her of spying on Rudwick's house. How did the information get leaked? Only she has access to it. And it ends up in the hands of the Rigelhofs?
You couldn't possibly be claiming that I'm the only one who had access to these documents, could you? Rhinon was the original writer, and other staff used the same office space, and Mother, Rice, and all looked at this document together.
Mr. Duke gets angry on the protagonist, as she is trying to blame Rudwick's. The protagonist now remembers it. This is just how it happened in the novel with Edith. Nobody ever calls Edith by the name Rudwick. Everyone see her as another Rigelhof. The protagonist also gets intimidated by the behavior she is facing and shouts at everyone and asks,
Is Rice also a Rudwick? I was responsible for organizing these documents. Would I not realize that I would be the first to take the blame if something like this happened? If you truly didn't trust me, you shouldn't have even given me false information. You should not have given me anything at all. Well, I guess if I were caught smuggling information, to me you would have a valid excuse to threaten the Rigelhofs, wouldn't you?
Protagonist feels so bad in her heart even after telling Rigelhof she would never smuggle out any information, but somehow these documents end up in the hands of her father Rigelhof.
I am little disappointed that Rhinon tricked me since I thought of him as almost a friend, but I still don't think he is behind this plot. And there is no way Rice would have done it. Then could it be the spy my father planted in the manor? But if father had a spy who could get their hands on a document like this, he didn't need to go through the trouble of marrying me into the family. In this novel, Edith was the one behind everything. She smuggles the information to the Reichelhofs as soon as she starts helping Mrs. Duchess, and the Rudwicks manage to screw over the Reichelhofs with false information without any repercussions. When Edith's crimes were discovered, Edith was confined to her room as punishment. She never gets another chance to be recognized as a part of the Rudwick family. Both the jeweler incident and this incident happened as in the original novel, regardless of my own actions.
Could this mean that I am doomed to follow Edith's fate as in the original novel, no matter what I do? I am falling lower and lower in the darkness. In the end, I will face my death at Killian's sword.
The protagonist could not hold herself any longer, and some drops of her pain fell from her disappointed eyes. And she swears her life and honor to prove her innocence.
If you are so certain I did this, just take my life.
The protagonist's words shocked Killian and everyone present in the room. Cliff suggests further investigation into this matter. Mr. Duke Rudwick announced that Edith must remain under house arrest for the time being. The protagonist is experiencing the same situation as Edith in the novel. In the end, she ends up on house arrest until proven innocent. Mr. Duke Rudwick orders knights and Rhinon to arrest the protagonist, but Killian stops everyone and grabs the protagonist's hand, and takes the responsibility of escorting Edith to her room.
You come with me.
Everyone stand in awe. In Edith's room, Killian asks Edith what she just said now is not a wise thing to say. Killian tries to make her understand his father is a god of war. He won't hesitate to eliminate anyone if needed.
Wait, why are you bothered that I told him to take my life?
What I'm trying to say is, if you committed a crime you must pay the price, and if you're innocent, the truth should come to light.
Do you really think that it will happen? None of you trust me, so I can't trust you anymore. I wouldn't be surprised if you did whatever it took to make me the culprit. Am I wrong? You're the ones who gave me the falsified document, and you are the ones who told me Count Reichelhof acted exactly according to the document. And who will be the ones to investigate and decide the judgment? You. The only thing I can do is sit here, locked in this room, and accept whatever the judgment would be.
After listening to the protagonist's thoughts, Killian swears his honor to Edith and promises a fair investigation.
Our investigation will not be biased, and I assure you that you will not be treated unfairly, and I will update you the progress we make.
The protagonist entrusts Killian for fair judgment, but she asks a last question to Killian.
Will that promise still be valid even if Rice, Mother, and I are the two suspects? Are you sure you will be able to look past your biases?
Killian just stood there in a silent. And the scene changes. A magnificent palace comes into view. The grand entrance is guarded by guards who are welcoming the arriving guests. Among the guests are none other than the Cliff and Rice. And we see Story introducing a new character who welcomes both Rice and Cliff to the palace. Princess Katrine Iberia. She is the Emperor's younger sister of 4 years and his only immediate blood relative. Now we see Katrine looking for someone and ask where about Killian and shows some worry for him because of his absence.
He is a married man now. He can't leave his wife and go around with me.
And Cliff recalls what happened yesterday. When he mentioned to Killian that they were going to report everything to the Emperor, how Killian got angry and grabbed Cliff's neck.
We are not even sure yet that she is the culprit, but you are going to notify the Emperor already?
Cliff tries to calm Killian with the excuse that he is only going there to inform them about the further investigation. But Cliff never had seen Killian responding like that to something his father has decided. Scene shifts. We see a little girl crying on the hospital bed. Suddenly a bald girl appears behind her and asks her if she is also sick. And then they both share their feelings and have some deep conversations about death and life. And the little girl wishes to die because of her illness has become a burden to her parents. So she would rather just die now. The bald girl comforts her by telling her her wishes. I want to grow old. I want to grow out my hair and tie it in a ponytail. I want to put on lipstick and eye makeup and go downtown in the city. I want to see how people live. I want to fall in love. Want to have someone in my life who cares for me. If only I had the chance to do that. I could bear any amount of pain if I had a chance to fulfill my wishes. The protagonist just woke up from her dream. She has this dream whenever she struggles in life, and it motivates her. Although the bald girl said she feared death more than anything, she left the hospital without a word.
After I came back from my surgery, she was gone forever. She is the reason I cannot give up on my life. Once I changed my attitude, I found peace with my new lifestyle. Although house arrest was technically a punishment, but the alone time is perfectly restful for a homebody like me.
At least until Killian popped up out of the blue to join me for lunch.
So, what brings you here today? Without any warning, and for having a meal with me.
Killian simply stares at the protagonist, which irritates her even more as he suddenly starts having a meal with her.
So, you won't tell me the reason? What a jerk.
Do you think you can do whatever you want just because you're handsome and because you have a sexy, hot body,
And the next moment the protagonist feels embarrassed because she is distracted by Killian's appearance again. The protagonist shifts her focus to eating and munching on delicacies. And Killian decides to break his silence and tell her about the investigation, giving her every detail about how the investigation is going. And he also put Rice on the list of suspects. And he doesn't intend to go easy on her just because she's Rice. Investigation will be fair. She doesn't seem to be tense or worried about the matter, she is focused on eating. Killian comments on the protagonist's appetite.
It looks like your appetite hasn't suffered at all.
Well, why would it? I am innocent, and this soup tastes great. It is not like I am the one who did it, so why shouldn't I enjoy the food? Ah, I still have bread left over, but more soup.
Oh God, this woman.
And Killian slides a bowl of soup to the protagonist.
An extra portion I had prepared just in case.
And this is the first time we see Killian show care towards the protagonist. Now that Killian has left, the protagonist feels lonely because there is nothing for her to do. In her past life when she felt bored she had novels to read and she used to fold origami as a hobby. But that doesn't exist in this world. The protagonist asks her maid, Anna, what kind of hobbies the ladies have. Anna let her know what women do here as a hobby. The protagonist feels a bit uncomfortable because she is not good at any of these.
Needlework is probably a prerequisite for any lady in this world. And I am also worse at painting and I get scared of horses when I see them in real life.
The protagonist asks Anna to suggest something else for her. And Anna mentions one more thing the protagonist can do as her hobby. Recently, making wooden dolls and sewing clothing for them has become popular. And it's a good way to improve sewing skills, so parents tend to allow it as a hobby.
Ah, it is like playing with Barbies?
The protagonist asks Anna to buy her
a pair of fine quality dolls, some fabric, and a sewing kit. And she can keep the rest money as her tip.
Anna denies the protagonist's generosity by saying that serving is her job and she can't have the tip. The protagonist teases Anna.
Why can't you take money from me? Did Rudwick order you not to take money from me?
The protagonist knows from the very beginning that Anna was instructed to spy on her. Despite that, Anna and Rhinon were the only two people in the household who do not mistreat her.
Let's be honest. This is way too small of a sum to bribe you. You can take this as a small token of my appreciation.
Anna bought her a pair of male and female dolls and the rest of the items required for sewing. In the next scene, we see the protagonist stitching dresses and struggling to do the job. But after some struggle, she managed to decorate the dolls nicely.
Right, it's just for fun. Who cares if I am bad at it? Isn't the whole point about having fun while killing time and money? The fact that I am bad at it makes it an even greater luxury. Now that I think about it, I never even considered such luxuries in my previous life. I always felt chased by the need to be efficient and frugal. Perhaps that's why I finally feel like I'm living as my own, although I am inhabiting a foreign world.
We see the protagonist feeling proud in her heart, her eyes can tell how happy she is now. And without wasting her time she starts playing with dolls. After some playing with dolls, she decides to move to real needlework. She starts practicing embroidery on a white cloth. Suddenly Killian opens the door in a panicking situation and informs the protagonist that they discovered new findings of proof against her.
Edith's father has found proofs against you. He will call you in soon. How will you explain yourself now?
Well, I should congratulate him for trying so hard to frame me for something I didn't do.
What are you talking about? Do you think this is funny? Or do you really not have any fear of Duke Rudwick?
Well,
I know that I am too essential to the plotline to disappear yet. In the original novel, Edith actually committed the crime, but the Duke let her go.
I can't understand you.
The Rhinon interrupts the conversation and informs that Mr. Duke Rudwick is calling Lady Edith.
Cheer up, Killian, shouldn't you be happy you have proof?
In the next scene, during the conversation, Mr. Duke presents a handwritten note that seems to resemble the protagonist's writing. He suggested that, given the losses her father had endured due to the incident, he would refrain from imposing any punishment if she decided to be honest about leaking the info.
Your Grace, this is not a matter of punishment. This is a matter of my honor, and if you compare this to the documents I have written in the past. I don't write such sloppy tables. This document was written by someone who does not understand how to organize the table properly.
Mr. Duke still keeps on accusing her of intentionally faking her handwriting.
Why would I? If I were afraid of being caught, I wouldn't have used my handwriting to begin with.
To prove her innocence, the protagonist orders Rhinon to bring her diary for the comparison of both handwritings. The protagonist in her mind.
Even though the tables might be shabby, whoever wrote this understands the basic principles. If the Mrs. Duchess, Rice, or someone else I taught this method, tried to frame me, it would make perfect sense. But why would Duke Rudwick go that far? He didn't have to make things so complicated. It's almost as if someone wants to frame me, Edith, just like in the original novel.
Rhinon brings the diary, and the protagonist tries to show the difference between both handwritings. As you can see, my handwriting is slightly different. If you look at the Q in my diary, it's completely different from the Q in the so-called evidence. Thus, you can see this is a carefully forged document. And you need to find the rat who did it, Your Grace.
Suddenly, there's a knock at the door. Rice stands outside the room, having been summoned by the Duke for further questioning about the matter. The Duke asks Rice who else knows about the table method, but she pretends that she doesn't understand the method at all and claims that no one understands it either.
She didn't understand it? But when I taught her last time, I'm sure she said yes, I got everything. Why is she doing this?
Mr. Duke asks Rice to leave and accuses Edith of leaking information based on Rice's testimony.
The tables look nothing like what I usually use. The writing doesn't match. Even after I show you all this evidence, you trust Rice's words over mine.
I can't remember the exact details of how Rice proved Edith culprit in the original novel, but I thought someone as honest and kind as Rice would have some credible evidence. Not some shoddy story like this. Perhaps she didn't have any evidence to use because I never did it in the first place.
Wait, where my diary is. Killian! What are you thinking now? Oh my God, you can't just read someone's diary. None of you even have a shred of respect for me, do you? Killian!
Mr. Duke accepts he doesn't have any valid point and definitive evidence either way. He closes this case for now and rescinds the house arrest order. The scene shifts and we see the protagonist and Killian arguing.
I can't trust you.
I know, you never trusted me, and you never will.
After everything that's happened with the Reigelhoffs, don't you think my suspicion is justified?
How many times do I need to tell you that I have nothing to do with what my family does?
But you did play a part in it. Are you going to deny what you have done to help your father's scheme so far?
What are you saying?
Suddenly, the protagonist was overwhelmed by flashbacks, with a million different scenes flashing through her mind. Not only had she seduced men for information, but she had also disrupted parties of families allied with the Rudwicks and ruined several of their engagements. After reliving all of Edith's past wrongdoings, the protagonist stood silently, consumed by guilt, with no words to defend herself.
Let me take you to your room.
So much happened all at once. Although I'm no longer under house arrest, I can't stop thinking about Rice. She is nothing like the Rice I read about in the novel.
Passing through the hall, Killian recalls what the protagonist had written in her diary about how much she admired and thought about him. This irritates Killian so much that he demands a duel with Cliff to quell his inexplicable irritation. The scene shifts to the next morning. We see the protagonist visit Mrs. Duchess. Mrs. Duchess was also waiting for the protagonist to come to meet her in person.
I heard you went through a lot yesterday, Edith. Sometimes emotional burdens are harder than physical burdens.
Mother, Your Grace. I truly never leaked any information out of Manor. I know you won't trust me. I don't care if I am put under house arrest for longer. I can swear it on my life. I can never do this.
I trust you, Edith. It must have been so hard on you. I trust you, Edith. I know you tried your best to help me. I have seen you struggling to find your place here. How could I not know? I have been in your shoes before. I don't know who pulled this nasty prank, but I know you are not responsible for it, my dear.
After hearing all these kind and gentle words, the protagonist breaks down and cries like a lost child who has finally found her home.
In my father's home, I was never.
As the protagonist is on the edge of revealing her father's hidden truth, a sudden wave of darkness overcomes her, accompanied by the sharp noise of beeping echoing in her mind. After that we see a servant scrambled towards the training ground, where Killian was engaged in a duel. Breathless, the servant delivered news of the protagonist's alarming condition. Without a moment's hesitation, Killian dashed away, urgency driving him to her side. Tension hangs in the air as the protagonist's condition comes to light. After a thorough examination, the doctor suggests that her fainting spell stems from the immense stress she's been under lately. It seems the weight of her experiences has taken a considerable toll on her well-being.
She remained confident in front of my father during the interrogation yesterday, but later she cried until her eyes turned red. It's hard to believe that the proud and arrogant Edith Reigelhoff would cry so much that she fainted. What did you discuss with her mother?
She insisted that she never leaked any information from the manor, knowing I wouldn't believe her.
She has been saying that all along.
I told her that I believed in her and trusted her. That was when she started crying. She said no one had trusted her until now. She thanked me. Edith must have been longing to hear that.
I know you never trusted me, and you never will be.
Killian found himself reflecting on his words to the protagonist from the previous day, a weight of guilt settling in. Out of nowhere, a piercing pain shot through his head. Each time he attempted to connect with the protagonist, an unseen barrier seemed to push him back. Meanwhile, Mrs. Duchess called for the doctor, but Killian intervened, urging his mother that he would be fine.
It's just a headache. I'll get better after a bit of rest.
As Rice made her way over, drawn by the news about the protagonist, she noticed Killian standing there, looking far from well. Concerned for both him and Edith, she had come to check on them. Just as her hand reached out towards him, he instinctively pulled away, subtly signaling his need for space.
I'm fine, Rice. Sorry, I need to rest.
We see our protagonist falling somewhere deep in darkness.
Where am I? It's pitch black. Wait, did I die again? All I did was cry.
In the depths of darkness, a sudden prompt window materialized before the protagonist, its message cryptic and foreboding. It warned her that her secret must remain hidden until she met 3 unknown conditions. As she strained to comprehend her situation, clarity began to seep back into her mind. She awoke with a jolt, gasping for air, her memory a blank slate regarding the system and its ominous prompt. The conditions were a mystery, and until they were fulfilled, her lips were sealed. Anna, her loyal maid, informed her that she had been unconscious for 2 days. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Her words to the Duchess had rendered her consciousness for days. Attempting to approach the subject again, she felt her consciousness slipping away, the system's warning echoing in her mind. She cut herself off, choosing to remain silent, the weight of the unknown pressing heavily upon her. And the protagonist wondered about Killian's visit but paused, reluctant to invite a negative response. She caught herself mid-thought and decided to dismiss the question altogether.
When I woke up in Edith's body for the first time, I thought I was the main character of a reincarnation story. I believed that as long as I had a good heart and acted righteously, I could avoid death, resolve conflicts, and become the protagonist's friend. I even held on to the idea that I would have a love story of my own. However, now I realized that hope was futile. I decided to live a quiet life. After giving up on my marriage, I was content to live as the lady of a wealthy household. Yet, my life continued to follow the original story, regardless of my plans. No matter what I did, the outcomes always aligned with the original storyline, as if a strange power were guiding my life to ensure everything proceeded as intended. I had been mistaken from the start. I could not change the story. Neither Edith nor I are the main characters. This is not our story. Edith Reigelhoff is the villain of this romantic fantasy, and her role is not significant enough for the novel to elaborate on her backstory. She is fated to be killed by her husband's sword, and I am doomed to a tragic ending.
Feeling overwhelmed by the surveillance by the original storyline, the protagonist reflects on Edith's experiences. That night, inspired by the novel, the protagonist decides to sneak into Killian's bedroom, attempting to kiss him while he sleeps. It's an echo of Edith's past attempts at seduction, a blend of nerves and determination guiding her actions.
I know he resents being forced to marry me, yet sometimes he acts like he cares, which makes me cling to foolish hope. After this incident, I wish he would hate me as he's supposed to so I can sort out my own feelings. When he wakes up, I know he will look at me with disgust.
Nothing unfolded as she had anticipated. Suddenly, Killian's eyes opened, and in a surprising twist, he seized her hand. Before she could process it, he pushed her onto his bed, his grip unwavering. A palpable tension filled the room, their breaths intertwining in the thick air. The moment was charged. Each heartbeat resonated like a drum in the stillness.
Satisfy me, Edith. Seduce me like the Reigelhoffs taught you. Who knows? I might end up attached to your body.
The protagonist halted Killian, her eyes searching his.
Are you sure about this?
She whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment.
It's your first time, and you were saving yourself for Rice.
Killian's breath hitched, the gravity of his decision hanging in the air between them. The tension was palpable, each heartbeat echoing the unspoken emotions swirling around them.
I should be asking you that question. Aren't you the one who was so confident in yourself that you would crawl into my bed in the middle of the night?
The air thick with anticipation as Killian and the protagonist finally shared their first kiss. It started soft, almost tender, but soon grew hungrier, the heat between them undeniable. In one swift motion, he removed his shirt, the muscles in his chest and arms flexing in the dim light. He took her hand, guiding it over his bare skin, his voice a low growl, filled with raw desire. Now, he whispered, his lips grazing her ear.
You can touch me as you want.
The protagonist's heart raced, her skin tingling at the realization, Killian had read her diary. He knew every secret thought, every hidden desire she'd ever had about him. Her face flushed, not just with the intimacy of the moment, but with the embarrassment and thrill of knowing he'd read her deepest fantasies. As their eyes met, Killian's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty flashing in his usually confident gaze.
Is this what you wanted?
He asked, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable.
Am I what you wanted?
She could hardly form words, too overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. Instead, she nodded, and that was all the confirmation he needed. His mouth claimed hers again, more fervently this time, his hands trailing down her body, igniting every nerve. The room dissolved into passion, all thoughts abandoned except for the feel of each other. Morning came too soon. The protagonist woke, her mind swirling with disbelief. Her mind is struggling to process what had happened between them. As she is trying to process everything, Killian comes near her and lifts her in his arms and carries her to the bathtub. And reminds her how she was dozed off in the tub on the first night. The protagonist doesn't get what exactly is happening with her suddenly.
Even if he ended up doing it last night on a whim, I expected him to immediately regret it in the morning. He forfeited his first kiss and his virginity that he had been saving for Rice all this time, all because of a momentary lapse in judgment at my seduction. In fact, Killian never seemed like someone who would fall for Edith's seduction in the first place. Perhaps he pitied me? Or perhaps he is trying to replace Rice since she is practically Cliff's now.
I'm sorry I exhausted you while you were still recovering. You should take it easy for the next few days.
After the wedding, how cold he was with me, I could never have imagined his gentle voice now. I don't know what changed, but he held me last night while calling my name. And that was truly.
Wake up!
Those around her couldn't help but notice her growing detached. Her mind was clearly preoccupied with the Killian's action and weird dream from the previous night. In that dream, a system window reappeared, offering congratulations for meeting the first condition.
Due to the changing circumstances, some of the original creator's authority has been revoked in the novel storyline. Is the first condition now going to be disengaged? Is this referring to the 3 conditions from when I lost consciousness? I doubt you will answer any of my questions, but what was the first condition?
The protagonist tries to talk to the system, but its answer shocks her. The system tells her she must follow the same path that led to Edith's failure. However, to change her fate, she must succeed in every challenge. This rule is set by the system or maybe the author of the story to work against her. But the original creator lost control when she met the first condition. This suggests there's a powerful force, like a god or the will of the story itself, which is trying to keep everything on track.
How can the original creator's authority be revoked in a novel that's already been published? In what areas and how much of it was revoked? And how much has their authority influenced the events thus far? On each event, each character, or the general sequence of events? And what links everything together, and where is this original creator?
The protagonist began to understand that certain actions could shift the direction of the narrative of this story, allowing her to influence the unfolding events in unexpected ways.
I need to see how Killian will respond to the next incident in the story.
In the morning, the protagonist decides to pay a visit to Mrs. Duchess. It was important for her to resume their work together. Otherwise, the protagonist risked being seen as merely a nominal bride, carrying the weight of disgrace and barred from managing significant matters. Such a perception could lead to a loss of respect from those around her.
If it's okay with you, I would like to keep helping with work, Mother.
The scene shifts to the protagonist arriving in Rhinon's workplace, where the responsibilities are quietly passed to her. As she takes on this new role, memories from her past life begin to surface, revealing glimpses of her former self.
In my past life, I hated my boss who constantly emphasized that the team was like family. As someone who takes pride in my work and doesn't like to flatter others, they often labeled me as unsociable and undervalued my professional skills.
The scene shifts to a dining table where Cliff, Killian, and Rice are gathered. Cliff calls Rhinon to inquire about the protagonist's performance and if he has noticed anything unusual in her behavior. Killian feels uneasy listening to Cliff. He knows the protagonist asked for supervision herself and dislikes how Cliff is portraying her. As he thinks about her, a sharp pain shoots through his head, making him question his own thoughts. Killian wonders, why do you care how he speaks about Edith? Killian has also been instructed to keep an eye on the documents the protagonist handles to ensure none go missing. Rhinon then speaks up, correcting Cliff. He explains that the protagonist volunteered to help him and has been working diligently without complaint, despite his office being quite modest for someone like her. He praises her attention to detail, focus, decision-making skills, and above all, her grit and strength of character. Everyone is surprised by Rhinon's praise, as it's rare for him to commend someone so highly. Cliff thanks Rhinon and asks him to keep watching the protagonist. Rice comments on how impressive it is that Edith has won Rhinon's admiration so quickly. Cliff speculates whether Rhinon has fallen for her. Killian, frustrated by their gossip, leaves the table, overthinking everything about the protagonist.
Edith has a unique beauty compared to Rice. If Rhinon spends hours alone with such a seductive woman, anything could happen to a man's heart.
Killian approaches the protagonist's door with all these thoughts in his mind, and as he opens it, he's unexpectedly greeted by the scent of roses. A fragrance he once disliked now feels strangely comforting. He scans the room but doesn't see the protagonist. His eyes land on a pair of cute dolls that resemble him and Edith. Just then, the protagonist appears, flustered, and quickly moves the dolls out of Killian's sight.
This is just a hobby, my new hobby. It's not good enough to show others. Anyway, why are you entering my room without my permission?
Killian reassures her, and they sit together in an awkward silence. To break the tension, Edith asks why he came to see her. Killian compliments her on her excellent work. Feeling a bit shy, Edith responds,
It's all thanks to Mother. I started helping her secretary, Baron Rhinon Filch. Maybe you know him.
She immediately feels silly for mentioning the secretary's name.
Of course he knows Rhinon is one of the key staff in this house.
Killian nods, explaining that he knows the Filches well. He shares he grew up with Rhinon as a child and how Viscount Theo Filch, Rhinon's father, used to be his father's secretary. Killian's father had granted them their own land, and now Rhinon has taken over his father's role in the capital as a secretary. The protagonist is surprised, as she never knew this about Rhinon. In the original novel, there was no mention of Rhinon's backstory, but it seems he has a significant past with the main characters. This realization makes her uneasy, especially since this is Killian's first visit since that night. She wonders why he is suddenly sharing all this information with her.
You seem curious about my visit. I will soon travel south to the Raisin territory.
The protagonist remembers that this land was granted to Killian because, as the Duke's second son, he wouldn't inherit the kingdom.
I will be gone for quite a while by any chance. Do you want to join me?
The protagonist, surprised, seeks confirmation.
Do you really want me to join you on the trip?
The scene shifts and we see Killian standing outside the protagonist's door, his face clouded with disappointment. She hadn't believed him when he invited her on the trip and had simply wished him a safe journey.
You joke too much, but thanks for inviting me. Have a safe journey.
Killian stands outside the protagonist's door, regretting his invitation. His maid informs him, "Young master, your father is waiting for you outside." In the next scene, we see the protagonist has just finished her work and notices Rhinon watching her. She approaches him, and he quickly says it's nothing, adding, "Mrs. Grace asked you to drop by when you're done." As she leaves, Rhinon looks to her desk and checks the documents she handles and is astonished by her efficiency. She has organized everything in a day, a task that usually takes a week. In the next scene, Mrs. Duchess shares some news with Rice and the protagonist about the upcoming charity auction hosted by Countess Erminia next month. She suggests that they should host a sewing party at their house starting the following day and inquires if they would be interested in participating. The protagonist reminisces about this moment.
This marks the beginning of the charity auction incident. The gentle ladies typically offer their embroidered pieces for these charity auctions. In this society, needlework is considered an essential skill for any woman. This event provides the perfect opportunity to showcase one's abilities. Consequently, when a charity auction is announced, every lady of noble lineage seeks to participate in a sewing party, regardless of her age. Given the Rudwick family standing among the houses aligned with the Emperor, Duchess Rudwick is sure to host one of these parties. However, I worry that my skills are nowhere near good enough for such an event. I feel I must turn down the invitation.
The protagonist tries to decline the invitation, but Rice insists, saying she can only muster the courage to attend if Edith joins her. Mrs. Duchess also starts urging Edith to go. The next day, Rice presents a beautifully crafted piece of cloth, leaving the protagonist puzzled about why Rice was worried about being a burden. Everyone gathers around Rice, praising her skills. The protagonist tries to recall if Rice had created something like this in the novel. Rice then shifts the focus to the protagonist, asking what she plans to make. Hesitant, the protagonist finally says she'll make a handkerchief. Meanwhile, a scene shifts to Killian, who has arrived at the Raisin territory with his father, observing the area from a mountain cliff. A sense of relief washes over him as he realizes the territory exceeds his initial expectations. He had feared what he might inherit, worrying that it would be insufficient compared to the grandeur of the Duke's kingdom. Despite the castle's modest upkeep and sparse decorations, it is in relatively good condition. He notes the need to find a skilled furniture craftsman upon returning to the capital. Killian ponders the circumstances further, recognizing that being a Reigelhof means wealth, but doubts linger about whether an old estate like this would satisfy Edith, who has spent her life in the capital. As he surveys the territory, his father questions him whether this would be enough for him.
And what if it's not enough for me? Should I demand more land? A higher title? Or would you be so kind as to hand me my brother's position? Shall I ask you to name me your heir? To designate me as the next duke? After all this time, what could you possibly want from me to even pose that question? I've done everything you ever wanted. There was only one dream I held on to, and you crushed it mercilessly by marrying me off to a Reigelhof.
It seemed that all the anger stemmed from Killian's fantasies. He may have nodded in agreement, expressing satisfaction, but Mr. Duke could perceive a deeper truth. Killian was far from happy. There was a sense of disgust in him regarding the choices his father had made on his behalf.
Don't worry about me, father. Once you transfer the deed, I will move here with my wife and manage the land.
Finally the day had arrived for the charity auction, resembling a lively carnival, with a myriad of items for sale. As the protagonist and Rice wandered from stall to stall, they took in the variety of offerings, from food to jewelry. Rice noted that their own pieces were on display, and Rice exclaimed over a piece that had already been marked with a ribbon, indicating its sale. It seemed the auction was proving to be quite competitive.
Let's go check out the pieces over there.
As they moved on, the protagonist reflected on the situation. Cliff, Rice's love interest, had the perfect chance to acquire her donations while she tried to avoid the embarrassment of her handkerchief standing out among the more impressive creations. As they moved through the event, whispers began to circulate about Rice. What has the world come to? A bastard at a charity auction. One lady murmured. That bastard is now a ward of Duke Rudwick. Apparently, the Duke and Duchess fawn over her. Perhaps they're keeping her as a sort of pet. The protagonist couldn't help but think that some things never change, no matter the world. She noted,
They know we can hear their gossip, yet they have no shame. All these low-class country women, parading around the charity auction. They must be from some tiny town out in the sticks. I don't even recognize any of their faces.
One of the gossiping women retorted, "If you can't even recognize Countess Brynn, then perhaps you should reflect on your learning and refinement, Lady Rigelhoff." The protagonist replied,
"Perhaps you should reflect on your own refinement before you attempt to scold others. You should know my family name changed months ago. And your manners, accosting an innocent passerby like this, are quite lacking."
Another woman chimed in, "I'd heard the Rudwicks made a bad choice in their daughter-in-law, but I never thought she would be this terrible. She makes the bastard of theirs look downright pleasant. At least she knows her place in life."
"And what does that make you? The person who must listen to someone even less than a bastard? You know what will happen to the Brynns if Cliff hears about what you said."
At the mention of Cliff's name, the gossiping women quickly scattered. After the gossipers leave, Rice apologizes to the protagonist for the unpleasant encounter. The protagonist asks if she knows those women, and Rice confirms they are friends of Countess Sinclair. The protagonist pets Rice and comforts her. Later, we see Killian return from his trip and the protagonist sees him talking to Rice. The protagonist considers greeting him but hesitates, fearing she might be ignored. Yet, she knows that not greeting him would spark more gossip among the ladies. As Killian glances her way, their eyes meet, locking in a moment of silent understanding.
"I missed you. I mean, did you have a nice journey?"
Shit, I almost told him I missed him.
"Killian, why are you looking at me like that?"
It's nothing. It was a very nice journey. Did anything happen while I was away?
"Nothing much. I was just a little bored."
Why? Because I wasn't around?
Not everything is about you, Killian.
Feeling bored and having had too much iced tea, the protagonist excuses herself. As she heads to the restroom, a shadowy figure emerges from behind the walls. The unknown person grabs her hand and pulls her into a corner. To her shock, the figure turns out to be Edith's. We see that the person is none other than her own brother. "Who are you?" "Edith, have you already forgotten my voice?" he asks. The protagonist had forgotten that her family could also attend the charity auction. Shane Rigelhoff is Edith's real brother, whom the protagonist had forgotten about. The protagonist's brother was visibly distressed. "What on earth happened to you? Are the Rudwicks keeping you under watch?" he asked. He recalled the letter where the protagonist had mentioned stopping their pursuit of the Rudwicks, which he had initially dismissed as a joke. But then, the protagonist had sent documents about weapons, which turned out to be falsified. "They were testing you by giving you false documents, weren't they? Did you send that letter because they were watching?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. We know Rigelhoffs had no real concern for the protagonist's well-being, they were simply using her for their profit. The protagonist shows a sense of disgust.
"You seem to be misunderstanding something. My advice in the letter was sincere, and exactly when, where, and from whom did you get that document about the weapons?" "That false document was not from me,"
she clarified. Meanwhile, Killian is waiting outside for the protagonist to return, his eyes scanning the area for her. A few hours earlier, before approaching anyone at the charity auction, Killian had been hiding in the bushes and overheard a conversation between the protagonist and some women who were gossiping about Rice. He listened to how Edith defended Rice against the ladies who were speaking ill of her, and the protagonist has also heard what all the women think about Edith. Apparently, even Killian, her own husband, ignores her, and no one acknowledges her in Rudwick Manor. After a while, Killian becomes bored of waiting. So he decides to check himself where the protagonist is. He checks the bathroom and sees the protagonist talking to her brother, Shane Rigelhoff. He hides behind the wall and tries to listen to their conversation but can't hear anything because of the distance, and after a while, the protagonist ends the conversation and takes a deep breath of relief. As she moved, she spotted Killian standing behind the wall with a surprised look on his face. Killian calmly asked her what took so long, hoping she would be honest with him, but she lied and brushed off the question. On the way back to the venue, "Did you come to look for me?" she asked. "Why? Does that give you butterflies?" "Of course. Having someone care about your absence would make anyone's heart pound. Why is she looking at me like that?" As Killian and Edith were having a conversation, an announcement was made, notifying everyone that this year's charity auction was a success and that every donated item had been sold for a high price. Suddenly, Edith realized that if everything had been sold, it meant someone had bought her handkerchief too. I was worried my handkerchief would be the last item left over, she said. We see a flashback where Killian's mother, Mrs. Duchess, telling Killian about the handkerchief Edith had made herself inspired by his eyes. And protagonist was thinking about him while making it. In the present, Killian is holding that handkerchief in his pocket. He murmured to himself, I bet she was just trying to win over my mother, and it would be a disgrace to our family name if one of our donations went unbought. He satisfies his ego by clarifying his actions to himself. The following day, a maid appeared at Rudwick Manor causing a commotion outside as she repeatedly shouting the protagonist's name. Accompanying her was Shane Reigelhoff, protagonist's brother, who had caused this scene to trouble the Rudwicks and increase her sister's misery. Shane leveraged the recent events to manipulate the situation. He addressed the onlookers, expressing sorrow over the loss of his sister, claiming that the maid, Sophia, was distraught by hearing Edith had been mistreated at the Rudwick Manor. His narrative painted a picture of concern, suggesting that the protagonist was not allowed to join social events with her friends. In truth, the protagonist chooses to decline invitations to improve her image as Edith is portrayed as an evil character in the story. With ulterior motives, Shane aimed to make the protagonist's life difficult. His words dripped with disdain as he reminded her of her place within the Rudwick household, suggesting that just because she resided there didn't mean he couldn't cause her trouble. As the uproar continued, Killian stepped forward with a counter-suggestion. If the Reigelhoffs were truly worried about their sister, they should leave Sophia with the Rudwicks. He reasoned that having Sophia, Edith's childhood maid, around would alleviate their concerns. The protagonist, in a moment of fear, called out for Killian, denying the need for a maid from her father's household. In the midst of this confrontation, she felt a wave of dizziness as a warning from within flashed before her. As she stumbled, her old maid caught her, whispering maliciously into her ear with a self-satisfied smirk before leading her away. In disbelief, the protagonist questioned whether the events were unfolding as they had in the original story or if the plot was veering into uncharted territory. With Sophia now inside Rudwick Manor, she knew that the impending narrative would center around Sophia's scheming, leaking critical information, acting as a spy, and even attempting assassination through poison. The scene shifted as Sophia viciously seized the protagonist, bullying her as she used to do at home. The protagonist felt like she was being reminded of her supposed place, who her real master is, with Sophia insisting that she needed to show the protagonist her true standing. Sophia glared at the protagonist and began beating her ruthlessly. You don't seem to understand your situation, miss. All you need to do is play the pretty doll who does as your master tells you to. The moment you outlive your worth, we will just kill you and blame the Rudwicks for your death. The scene shifts to the following morning, where the protagonist struggles through her work, her body aching from Sophia's beating the day before. Since Sophia's arrival at Rudwick Manor, the protagonist's freedom has slowly been stripped away. Sophia abuses her, spies on her, and even withholds food. Later, while working, the protagonist reflects on her life, noting how, in both this life and her past, she never imagined she would find the courage to stand against such cruelty. But she refuses to give up, especially when she thinks of Edith, who has endured similar abuse since childhood without any escape. After some time, we see the protagonist sitting alone in her room, hungry and ignored. No one notices her absence at dinner, as she's long been accustomed to eating alone since her house arrest. Anna used to bring her meals, but with Sophia now in control, the protagonist is deprived of food. Her stomach growls, and she murmurs, "I'm so hungry, I think I'm starting to imagine things." Her thoughts drift to Killian, wondering about his recent actions and if he truly cares for her. After a few moments, the protagonist is desperate to escape before Sophia returns with another cruel temptation. The protagonist goes for a walk in search of food. Meanwhile, Sophia is also thinking about the changes in the protagonist's behavior. Baffled by the protagonist's sudden defiance. I trained her for years, how could she change so quickly? She used to cower from a single slap, but now she dares to glare back after being hit. Watching her defiance break is becoming an intriguing challenge. As Sophia walks through the hall, she overhears someone mentioning the protagonist's name and sees her talking to Rice. A flashback reveals that the protagonist's brother had instructed Sophia to watch over Rice and learn more about her. Anger rises in Sophia, who has harbored feelings for Shane Reigelhoff herself, though she never dared to dream of becoming his wife. But seeing a bastard lowborn of a lowly maid seduces him with her fake innocence. After some time, the protagonist returned to her room, still feeling the gnawing hunger in her stomach. Just then, Sophia entered, presenting a slice of peach pie alongside a steaming cup of black tea. The protagonist was taken aback. She wouldn't have expected such hospitality from Sophia. Without giving it a second thought, she dove into the pie because of hunger. However, as she took her first bite, an unexpected sensation overwhelmed her. Suddenly, she was coughing, blood staining her lips as she fell to her knees, a chilling memory surfacing. Edith had poisoned herself in the story, but the protagonist herself hadn't done anything like that. The protagonist looks up, she catches a glimpse of Sophia's face, twisted into an unsettling evil smile. It sent a shiver down to the protagonist's spine as she heard Sophia's voice. The protagonist thought to herself, it's just like in the novel. In the book, Edith poisons the pie to give herself a stomachache and tries to blame it on Rice. Now, Sophia is the one who poisoned me and is trying to blame it on Rice. The protagonist woke up and tried to stop Sophia from creating a scene, apologizing to Rice for Sophia's behavior. But Cliff didn't believe her words and ordered a search of the protagonist's room. Sophia tried to intervene, but the protagonist just watched as they found a suspicious-looking bottle. The protagonist denied that the bottle doesn't belong to her. Cliff accuses her. So, are you saying someone snuck into your room and hid this in your cabinet? He accused the protagonist of faking everything and poisoning herself to defame Rice. Rice tried to stop Cliff, reminding him that the protagonist was already sick. Cliff warns the protagonist that he will return after investigating the bottle of poison. We could see the fear on Sophia's face. The protagonist mocked Sophia. You are all talk and no brain. You are not as clever as you pretend to be. Cliff found the bottle so easily. Is this you? Oversight or you are a fool? Sophia left the room, threatening the protagonist that if she said another word, she would kill her and blame Rudwick. In the next scene, we see Killian standing near the wall, listening to the conversation between Cliff and the doctor. The doctor explained that the poison was not strong but could cause pain and potentially some bleeding. After getting all the details about the poison, then Killian gets his chance to ask about the protagonist's situation and ask something to ease her suffering. The doctor replied, I have already prescribed her some painkillers, but you shouldn't expect them to have much effect on your wife. Killian, puzzled, asked why, since the poison wasn't strong. The doctor explained that the protagonist hadn't eaten in several days, so even weak poison would have a strong effect on her. Killian was stunned for a moment. A girl like her, who enjoyed food and couldn't resist it, had starved herself. He wondered if the protagonist could really have poisoned herself, knowing her body was in such a state. He thought, she did something so foolish just to get attention. What a pathetic and obstinate woman she is. He questioned whether the protagonist could really go that low for attention. Before she married him, she was always the center of attention in the social world, good or bad. But after marrying him, she became a second thought. Perhaps she was doing this to get attention, not to accuse Rice. What a scary woman she is. Killian created his own thoughts about the protagonist based on his knowledge of Edith. There's nothing I can do except watch her suffer, he thought. Edith was unaware that Killian was watching her the whole time. She thought she heard Killian's voice. Killian whispered, and somehow the protagonist heard him. Why would you poison yourself? The protagonist replied, You believe I did it too. Killian, in a worried tone, asked, Are you awake? The protagonist requests him to leave the room immediately. The protagonist had promised herself not to get her hopes up, yet it stung to realize that, ultimately, it was Rice who had come to her rescue. In a moment of reflection, she expressed her gratitude, acknowledging Rice as an angel and a true heroine, admitting to her doubts. Wanting to show appreciation for Rice's support, the protagonist sought Mrs. Duchess's advice on what Rice might like. Mrs. Duchess mentioned that Rice had a fondness for needlework and books, suggesting that while selecting a book might be challenging, a thoughtful gift related to her needlework could be a good idea. Consequently, the protagonist decided to present Rice with some fine silk threads as a token of her thanks. A week later, the protagonist was dancing with excitement in her room, eager to begin her work again and escape Sophia's watchful eyes. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from outside, and Killian rushed in, urgently inquiring about Rice's condition and accusing the protagonist of poisoning her with the threads she had gifted. The protagonist was taken aback. It seemed impossible. She had purchased the threads from a sewing supply shop, and no one had access to them after they were packaged. As she reflected on the original plotline where Sophia attempted to poison Rice by applying poison to the needle she gifted, doubt crept in. Had her well-meaning change inadvertently allowed for the original narrative to intertwine, leading to the substitution of her innocent gift with something tainted? Killian's firm grip pulled her back to the present as he demanded to know what she had done. Frustrated, the protagonist tried to explain that everyone was already casting suspicious eyes in her direction due to the incident with the pie. Why would I engage in such reckless behavior that would only attract more attention to me? Killian emphasized, you must think I don't want to believe you, but do you realize how many times this has happened now? Why can't you help me trust you, Edith? The protagonist moved closer to Killian, hoping to win him over. I don't want you to suspect me either, so hire a maid to surveillance me at all times. Sophia objected and growled in anger, but the protagonist smartly handled her. Sophia, there's nothing to worry about. I am innocent. Even if we call it surveillance, it's just another maid. The protagonist cleverly leveraged the situation in her favor, knowing that with surveillance, Sophia couldn't play her scheming tricks and harm her. The protagonist insisted that without volunteering for this, she wouldn't be able to prove her innocence. Killian agreed to her request and ordered a maid to call Anna for surveillance. The protagonist thought to herself, I am glad Killian reacted swiftly. If he had left the room even for a second, Sophia would have gotten her hands on me right away. Killian had resolved the matter, but the protagonist still had to explain how Rice ended up poisoned. She suggested interrogating the merchant who sold her the threads. Killian informed her that they had already taken him into custody. He had a thriving business, so why would he risk his livelihood on this? The protagonist agreed and asked if anyone else had access to those threads after she gifted them. Killian replied, not many people can freely enter Rice's room, Rice's maids, Cliff, my mother, and myself. The protagonist speculated, I know I might sound like I'm making excuses, but I can't shake the feeling that someone is using me as a scapegoat to harass Rice. Someone who would benefit if Rice were seriously hurt or died, or if I were punished for her loss. For example, the Sinclairs might fall into that category. I heard rumors about her half-siblings trying to harm her several times. Let's be honest. This manor has many staff. Can you be sure that none of the Sinclair's spies have managed to infiltrate this house? Killian responded, you make it sound as if we also have a spy from the Reigelhofs in our midst. The protagonist continued, I am sure the Rudwicks have done the same. You know I would figure out as much. At first, I thought the Rudwicks were trying to frame me to humiliate the Reigelhofs. Killian swore, we would never stoop so low. I swear on my honor. We would never do such a thing. The protagonist laughed, ha ha ha, that certainly didn't take much to set you off. But even when I swore, no one believed me. Well, it's not as if I blame you. Don't think that anymore. Killian admitted, once I thought more about it, I didn't think you would put that much effort into me. You are surprisingly self-aware. Your hypothesis makes a lot of sense, but I am not sure if my father or my brother will agree. The protagonist thought to herself, at least he's pretending to trust me. He didn't seem to believe me about the pie. I understand. As long as we are being honest, I don't particularly want to prove my innocence to them. Rice is the only one I want to trust me. To be honest, it's not just Rice, but I don't need to tell him the whole truth. Rice is still doing her best to stay on the Rudwicks' good side. But she defended me, even if it meant she would have to go against the Rudwicks. If she thinks my presence were an attempt on her life, she will be disappointed in me. Killian raised an eyebrow and asked, don't you resent Rice? The protagonist replied, what? Why would I? Killian explained, well, since everyone praises her and not you. The protagonist asserted, Killian, let's get this straight, I'm Edith Rudwick. Do you think I would envy another woman over the opinions of others? The protagonist thought to herself, I never thought I would see the day when I could say that. As the protagonist was busy admiring herself, Killian grabbed her by the neck, tilted her towards him, and put his gentle lips on her. The protagonist was surprised by the sudden change of air but got lost in the moment. After a moment, they both looked into each other's eyes, and the protagonist whispered his name. Killian blushed and apologized for his sudden move. A few days later, the protagonist had barely shaken off the news from Anna, another house arrest. The poison in question was too ordinary, its source untraceable. The Duke had decided there wasn't enough evidence to push for more severe punishment, merely confinement within the manor walls. Across the manor, we see Cliff sitting beside Rice's bed. His anger radiates in his eyes, holding her frail hand and cursing the protagonist's name. In the next scene, within the royal palace walls, a tense conversation unfolded between Princess Katrin, the emperor's younger sister, and Cliff discussing the current situation of Rice's indignation. Princess Katrin slammed her hand on the table, outraged that Duke Rudwick had only placed Edith under house arrest. And the shocking thing for both is Killian also supports the protagonist in this current situation. Previous day back at Rudwick Manor, Killian snapped, "You're letting your emotions blind you, Cliff. If Edith poisoned Rice, how did she manage it under the Rudwick's unblinking eyes?" Cliff bristled. Then someone must have poisoned something she'd surely touch. Killian leaned closer, his eyes fierce. Are our spies suddenly so useless? Think it through, Cliff. This moment of doubt among the men ended when Duke Rudwick himself intervened, issuing a temporary gag order. The situation would remain confidential until they uncovered more concrete evidence. Currently, we observe Cliff and Princess Katrin conspiring against the protagonist. The scene shifts and we see the protagonist entering the palace grounds, accompanied by Duke Rudwick. She couldn't ignore the fact, she was never meant to be here, it was never part of the original story's plotline. And yet, here she was, summoned by none other than Princess Katrin herself. Hours earlier, the protagonist had visited the Mrs. Duchess after her full recovery when she received the news. The princess wants to see her, the Duchess said. This is a great opportunity for the protagonist to become friends with Princess Katrin. Now, standing in the Grand Palace Hall, Edith's mind swirled with questions. Princess Katrin had a reputation for wild independence, shirking formalities, ignoring dresses, even sporting a short, rebellious bob. She was notorious for defying every rule in the book. The protagonist had once admired her rebellious spirit when reading the story. But now, face to face with Katrin's cold stare, that admiration felt dangerously misplaced. I suspected she called me with hostile intentions, but this I worse than I imagined. Bowed, greeting the princess, who responded only with a dismissive glance. The protagonist can't say anything besides standing silently until Princess Katrin accepts her greeting. Princess Katrin glances at the protagonist and addresses the protagonist as another Reigelhoff. The protagonist lowers her chin and replies, "My name is Edith Rudwick, Your Highness," in a sad tone. And then Princess Katrin mocks the protagonist, "I didn't prepare any tea. I hope you understand. After all, you are infamous for using poison on people." Princess Katrin accuses the protagonist indirectly of poisoning Rice. The protagonist realizes everything is set by Cliff. The protagonist seemed indifferent toward Princess Katrin, meeting her rudeness with a gaze that revealed no desire for acceptance. She acknowledged the truth in Katrin's words, admitting that while she had never resorted to poison, her previous actions could indeed be seen as unwise, likely leading to misunderstandings fueled by rumors. The princess pointed out that the marriage had come about solely because of Reigelhoff's insistence, shifting the burden squarely onto Killian's shoulders. The protagonist, "My maiden family made that decision. Although I have already left them behind, I cannot feign innocence." Princess Katrin accuses the protagonist, "Even though you speak to me about loyalty, you are just like any of the aristocrats who lust after my brother and my throne. How do I know you aren't filling my ears with empty words? And I bet you think I look ridiculous like this." The protagonist puts a smile on her face and replies, "Not at all, I respect you, Your Highness." We see the protagonist recalling some glimpse of the original story after Grand Duke Langston's rebellion fails near the end of the book. Rice and Katrin spend some time together on La Belle Marie venue. Katrin wears a wig to hide her true identity. They visit dress shops and Katrin ends up wearing a dress for the first time since her debutante days. Then she changes her attitude and starts hosting tea parties at the palace with Rice's help. She eventually matures into her responsibilities as a princess and leads the social scene. But the protagonist always preferred the independent princess who sought freedom above all else and did what she believed was right, no matter what others might say. Returning to the present, Edith met Katrin's wary gaze with a steady look. "Please, Your Highness, let your own wisdom judge me, not the rumors." After hearing the protagonist's words, Princess Katrin blinked, momentarily caught off guard and moved by what she heard. The scene shifts to the protagonist returning to Rudwick Manor, where she appears worried about not choosing her words wisely in front of Princess Katrin. Suddenly, the protagonist felt a firm hand grip her from behind, yanking her into the shadows. She gasped as her back hit the cold stone wall, only to find herself face to face with Sophia. Without a word, Sophia's hand shot to her throat, fingers tightening as her eyes glinted with a deadly resolve. "This is your last chance," Sophia hissed, her voice low and venomous. "If you betray the master again, I'll end you myself." The threat hung in the air like a dagger, sharp and unforgiving. The protagonist struggled to breathe, eyes wide with fear and understanding. There would be no mercy if she failed. Sophia's gaze was icy as she studied the protagonist, her lips curling with a mixture of scorn and amusement. "Why are you in such a hurry to be sent to your grave?" she murmured, voice almost soft but laced with venom. "Did your time with that family cloud your mind? Obsessing over that bastard child? I thought you'd regain your senses after poisoning his thread. But instead, you used it to try and run from me." Her grip tightened mercilessly, leaving the protagonist struggling for breath, vision blurring. Sophia's tone dropped to a chilling whisper. "If you want death so badly, I'll gladly grant it. My master has already given me his blessing." Just as darkness began to edge in, Sophia released her grip, letting the protagonist crumple to the ground, gasping for air. Her voice was cold and final. "Consider this your last chance," she warned. "Steal the dukedom's tax records, or next time, I won't let go." The protagonist gasped for air, struggling to speak. "What if they find out you're behind my death?" Sophia's lips curled into a smug smile. "Let me worry about that. If it comes to it, the Rudwicks will take the fall." The protagonist forced herself to look up, her voice hoarse but defiant. "And what if I tell everyone what you've done?" Sophia chuckled, her tone laced with mock pity. "You would have told them long ago if you could. You think I don't know why you're silent? The Reigelhoffs don't care about you, and when that becomes clear, Killian Rudwick will gladly watch you be thrown out." The protagonist's mind raced, bitter thoughts rising. "You know nothing, Sophia. If it weren't for the constraints placed on me. But even if I could break free, would I dare risk losing him to Rice?" Sophia settled down beside her, speaking in a voice almost pleasant. "And once you're no longer useful, my master will make sure you're put to use in ways you can't imagine. I'm sure you understand the kind of life that awaits." She gripped the protagonist's chin, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "But steal the documents, and maybe I'll speak favorably of you to young Master Shane. Even you should understand the value of that." The protagonist met Sophia's gaze with a deadened stare, her voice a whisper that barely masked her loathing. "Then here's my prediction for the future. No matter what you try, the Reigelhoff family will fall. And even my brother, whom you so admire, will face ruin." A shadow crossed Sophia's face, her jaw tensing, teeth grinding as rage simmered beneath the surface. Without another word, she struck, fists flying as her anger spilled over, relentless and brutal.
Hey, if you enjoyed this content and made it to the end of the video, click that subscribe button and be part of our adventure. Thank you so much.